Chapter 31 of The People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The White Dawn. Lifting Juanna in his arms, Leonard hurried from the sleeping apartment to the throne room, where he halted, hesitating, for he did not know what was to happen next. Soa, who had preceded him, surrounded by the four priests, and with a torch in her hand, stood against the wall of the chamber where she had laid bound on the night of the drugging of Otter. "Bald Pate has fainted with fear. He is a coward," she said to the priests, pointing to the burden in Leonard's arm. "Open the secret way and let us pass on." Then a priest came forward, and pressing upon a stone in the wall, which gave way, leaving a space sufficiently large for him to insert his hand and pull upon some hidden mechanism with all his force. Thereon a piece of the wall swung outward as though on a pivot, revealing a flight of steps beyond which ran a narrow passage. Soa descended first, bearing the light, which she was careful to hold in such a way as to keep the figure of Leonard and the burden that he bore in comparative darkness. After her went two priests, followed by Leonard, carrying Juanna, the rear being brought up by the remaining priests, who closed the secret door behind them. So that is how it is done, thought Leonard to himself, turning his head to watch the process, no detail of which escaped him. Otter, who had followed Leonard from Juanna's chamber, saw them go, though from some little distance, for, like a cat, the dwarf could see in the dark. When the rock had closed again, he returned to Francisco, who sat upon the bed lost in prayer or thought. "I have seen how they make a hole in the wall," he said, "and pass through it. Doubtless our comrades, the settlement men, went that way. Say, shall we try it?" "What is the use, Otter?" answered the priest. "The road leads only to the dungeon of the temple. If we got so far we should be caught there, and everything would be discovered, including this trick," and he pointed to the robes of Aca which he wore. "That is true," said Otter. "Come then, let us go and sit upon the thrones and wait till they fetch us." So they went to the great chairs and sat themselves down in them, listening to the tramp of the guards outside the doorway. Here Francisco resumed his prayers, while Otter sang songs of the deeds that he had done, more especially a very long one which he had composed upon the taking of the slave camp, to keep his heart alive, as he explained to Francisco. Quarter of an hour passed, and then the curtains were drawn aside, admitting a band of priests headed by Nam, and bearing two litters. "Now silence, Otter," whispered Francisco, drawing his hood over his face. "Here sits the god," said Nam, waving the torch he carried towards the two quiet figures on the thrones. "Descend, ye gods, that we may bear you to the temple, and seat you in a lofty place, whence ye shall watch the glories of the rising sun." Then, without more ado, Otter and Francisco came down from their seats and took their places in the litters. Presently they felt themselves being borne forward at a considerable speed. When they were outside the palace gates, Otter peered through the curtain in hope of perceiving some change in the weather. In vain. The mist was denser than usual, although it grew grey with the light of the coming dawn. Now they were at those gates of the temple that were nearest to the colossal idol, and here, at the mouth of the numerous underground passages, guards assisted them to descend. "Farewell, Queen," whispered the voice of Olfan in Francisco's ear. "I would have given my life to save you, but I have failed. As it is, I live to avenge you upon Nam and all his servants." Francisco made no answer, but pressed on down the passage, holding his head low. Soon they were at the foot of the idol, and, led by priests, began to ascend the stairway in the interior of the statue. Up they toiled slowly in the utter darkness. Indeed, to Francisco this, the last journey of his life, seemed the longest. At length they emerged upon the head of the colossus, where neither of them had been before. It formed a flat platform about 8 feet square, quite unprotected at the edges, beneath which curved the sheer outlines of the sculptured head. The ivory throne whereupon Juanna had sat when first she visited the temple was gone, and instead of it, placed at the verge of the forehead, were 2 wooden stools upon which the victims must seat themselves. From this horrible elevation could be seen that narrow space of rock between the feet of the colossus and the wall of the pool, where was the stone altar, although, owing to the slope of the bowed head, he who stood upon it almost overhung the waters of the well. Otter and Francisco seated themselves on the stools, and behind them Nam and 3 other priests took their stand, Nam placing himself in such a position that his companions could not see anything of Francisco's slight form, which they believed to be that of the shepherdess. "Hold me, Otter," whispered Francisco. "My senses will leave me and I shall fall." "Shut your eyes and lean back, then you will see nothing," answered Otter. "Moreover, make ready your medicine, for the time is at hand." "It is ready," he answered. "May I be forgiven the sin, for I could not bear to be hurled living to the Snake." Otter made no answer, but set himself to watch the scene beneath him. The temple was filled with mist that from the great height looked like smoke, and through this veil he could just distinguish the black and moving mass of the vast assembly, who had sat the long night through, waiting to witness the consummation of the tragedy, while the sound of their voices, as they spoke together in hushed tones, reached him like that of the murmuring of distant waters. Behind him stood the 4 priests or executioners in a solemn, silent line, their eyes fixed upon the grey mist, while above them, around them, and beneath them was nothing but sheer and giddy space. It was a hideous position, heightened by every terror that man and nature can command, and even the intrepid dwarf, who feared neither death nor devil, and over whom religious doubts had no power, began to feel its chilling influence grip his heart. As for Francisco, such mind as he had left to him was taken up with fervent prayer, so it is possible that he did not suffer so much as might have been expected. 5 minutes or more passed thus, then a voice spoke from the mist below, saying, "Are those who are named Aca and Jâl on high, O priest?" "They are on high," answered Nam. "Is it the hour of dawn, O priest?" said the voice again, and this time Otter knew it for that of the spokesman of the elders. "Not yet awhile," answered Nam, and he glanced at the snow peak that towered thousands of feet into the air behind and above the temple. Indeed, every eye in that assembly was staring at this peak, although its gigantic outline could only be seen dimly through the mist, dimly as the shape of a corpse buried in a winding sheet of snow. Here, upon the loftiest precipice of the mountain, the full light of morning struck first and struck always, for the pinnacles soared far above the level of the mist wreaths, and by the quality of that light this people judged the weather of the newborn day. If the snow was rosy red, then they knew that ere long the sun would shine upon them. If, on the other hand, it gleamed cold and white, or still worse grey, it was a sign that the coming day would be misty in the city and on the plains. Therefore in this, the hour of the trial of the gods whom they had set up, all that company watched the mountain peak as they had never watched before, to see if it should show white or red. Very gradually the light increased, and it seemed to Otter that the mist was somewhat thinner than was usual at this hour, though as yet it hung densely between them and the mountain snows. Now he could trace the walls of the amphitheatre, now he could see the black shimmer of the water beneath, and distinguished the glitter of the many hundreds of upturned eyeballs as they glared at him and beyond him. The silence grew more and more intense, for no one spoke or moved. All were waiting to see the dawn break upon the slope of snow, and wondering, would it be red or white? Must the gods die or live? So intense and fearful was the hush, unbroken by a breath of air or the calling of a bird, that Otter could bear it no longer, but suddenly burst into song. He had a fine deep voice, and it was a Zulu war song that he sang, a triumphant paean of the rush of conquering impus interspersed with the wails of women and the groans of the dying. Louder and louder he sang, stamping his naked feet upon the rock, while the people wondered at the marvel. Surely this was a god, they thought, who chanted thus exultingly in a strange tongue while men waited to see him cast into the jaws of the snake. No mortal about to die so soon, and thus terribly, could find the heart to sing, and much less could he sing such a song as that they heard. "He is a god," cried a voice far away, and the cry was echoed on every side till at length suddenly the men grew silent, and Otter also ceased from his singing, for he had turned his head and seen. Lo, the veil of mist that hid the mountain's upper height grew thin. It was the moment of dawn, but would it be a red dawn or a white? As he looked, the vapours disappeared from the peak, though they still lay thick upon the slopes below, and in their place were seen its smooth and shining outlines clothed in a cloak of everlasting snows. The ordeal was ended. No touch of colour, no golden sunbeam or crimson shadow stained the ghastly surface of those snows. They were pallid as the faces of the dead. "A white dawn, a white dawn!" roared the populace. "Away with the false gods! Hurl them to the snake!" "It is finished," whispered Otter again into Francisco's ear. "Now take your medicine, and, friend, farewell." The priest heard, and clasping his thin hands together, turned his tormented face, in which the soft eyes shone, upward towards the heavens. For some seconds he sat thus, and then Otter, peering beneath his hood, saw his countenance change, and once more a glory seemed to shine upon it as it had shone when, some hours since, Francisco promised to do the deed that now he was about to dare. And there was silence below, for the spokesman of the council of elders had risen, and was crying the formal question to the priests above. "Is the dawn white or red, ye who stand on high?" Nam turned and looked upon the snow. "The dawn is fully dawned, and it is white," he answered. "Be swift," whispered Otter into Francisco's ear. Then the priest raised his right hand to his lips, as though to partake of the sacrament of death. A moment later, and he let it fall with a sigh, whispering back to Otter, "I cannot, it is a deadly sin. They must kill me, for I will not kill myself." Before the dwarf could answer, nature, more merciful than his conscience, did that for Francisco which he refused to do for himself, for of a sudden he swooned. His face turned ashen, and slowly he began to sink backwards, so that he would have fallen had not Nam, who saw that he had fainted with fear, caught him by the shoulders and held him upright. "The dawn is white, we see it with our eyes," answered the spokesman of the elders. "O ye who stand on high, cast down the false gods according to the judgment of the people of the mist." Otter heard and knew that the moment had come to leap, for now he need trouble himself with Francisco no more. Swiftly he turned his head, looking for Nam, for he would know if he might carry out a purpose that he had formed. It was to seize the high priest and bear him to the depths below. It was not possible. He was out of reach. Moreover, were he to snatch Nam away, Francisco would fall backwards, and the others might see that this was not the shepherdess. Otter stood up upon his feet, and kicking the stool on which he had sat off the platform, he watched its flight. It flew into the water, never touching the rock, and then the dwarf knew that he had planned well. Now Nam and one priest seized the fainting form of Francisco, and the other two stepped toward Otter. The dwarf waited till their hands were outstretched to grasp him. Then suddenly he sprang at the man upon his right, and shouting, "Come thou with me," he gripped him about the middle in his iron grasp, and putting out all his strength, hurled himself and his burden into sheer space beneath. The priest shrieked aloud, and a gasp of wonder went up from the watching thousands as the dwarf and his victim rushed downward like a stone. They cleared the edge of the pool by an inch or two, no more, and struck the boiling waters, sinking through them till Otter thought that they would never rise again. But at last they did rise. Then Otter loosened the dead or senseless priest, and at that moment the body of Francisco, cast thither by Nam, struck the water beside him, and straightway vanished for ever. Otter loosened his grip, and diving beneath the surface, swam hard for the north side of the pool, for there he had noticed that the current was least strong, and there also the rock bank overhung a little. He reached it safely, and rising once more, grasped a knob of rock with one hand, and lay still where in the shadow and the swirl of waters he could not be discovered by any watching from above. He breathed deeply and moved his limbs. It was well, he was unhurt. The priest whom he had taken with him, being heaviest, had met the water first, so that though the leap was great, the shock had been little. "Ah," said Otter to himself, "thus far my spirit has been with me, and here I could lie for hours and never be seen. But there is still the snake to contend with," and hastily he seized the weapon that he had constructed out of the two knives, and unwound a portion of the cord that was fast about his middle. Then again he looked across the surface of the waters. Some 10 fathoms from him, in the exact centre of the whirlpool, the body of the priest was still visible, for the vortex bore it round and round, but of Francisco there was nothing to be seen. Only 30 feet above him Otter could see lines of heads bending over rocky edges of the pool and gazing at the priest as he was tossed about like a straw in an eddy. "Now, if he is still there and awake," thought Otter, "surely the father of crocodiles will take this bait. Therefore I shall do my best to be still a while and see what happens." As he reflected thus, a louder shout than any he had heard before reached his ears from the multitude in the temple above him, so tumultuous a shout, indeed, that for a few moments even the turmoil of the waters was lost in it. "Now what chance is up there, I wonder," thought Otter again. Then his attention was diverted in a somewhat unpleasant fashion. This was the cause of that shout. A miracle, or what the people of the mist took to be a miracle, had come about. For suddenly, for the first time within the memory of man, the white dawn had changed to red. Blood red was the snow upon the mountain, and lo, its peaks were turned to fire. For a while all those who witnessed this phenomenon stood aghast. Then there arose the babble of voices which had reached the ears of Otter as he lurked under the bank of rock. "The gods have been sacrificed unjustly," yelled the people. "They are true gods. See, the dawn is red." The situation was curious and most unexpected, but Nam, who had been a high priest for more than 50 years, proved himself equal to it. "This is a marvel indeed," he cried, when silence had at length been restored, "for no such thing is told in our history as that a white dawn upon the mountain should turn to red. Yet, O people of the mist, those whom we thought gods have not been offered up wrongfully. No, this is the meaning of the sign. Now are the true gods Aka and Jâl appeased, because those who dare to usurp their power have gone down to doom. Therefore the curse is lifted from the land, and the sunlight has come back to bless us." As he finished speaking, again the tumult broke out, some crying this thing and some that, but no action was taken, for Nam's excuse was ready and plausible, and the minds of men were confused. So the assembly broke up in disorder. Only the priests and as many more as could find place, often among them, crowded round the edges of the pool to see what happened in its depths. Meanwhile Otter had seen that which caused him to think no more of the shouting above him than of the humming of last year's gnats. Suffering his eyes to travel round the circumference of the rocky wall, he saw the mouth of a circular hole, situated immediately under the base of the idol, which may have measured some 8 feet in diameter. The lower edge of this hole stood about 6 inches above the level of the pool, and water ran out of it in a thin stream. Passing down this stream, half swimming and half waddling, appeared the huge and ungainly reptile which was the real object of the worship of the people of the mist. Great as were its length and bulk, the dwarf saw it but for a few moments, so swift were its movements. Then the creature vanished into the deep waters, to reappear presently by the side of the dead priest, who was now beginning to sink. Its horrible head rose upon the waters, as on that night when the woman had been thrown to it. It opened its huge jaws, and seizing the body of the man across the middle, it disappeared beneath the foam. Otter watched the mouth of the hole, and not in vain, for before he could have counted to 10, the monster was crawling through it, bearing its prey into the cave. Now once more the dwarf felt afraid, for the snake, or rather the crocodile, at close quarters was far more fearful than anything that his imagination had portrayed. Keeping his place beneath the ledge, which, except for the coldness of the water, he found himself able to do with little fatigue or difficulty, Otter searched the walls of the pool, seeking for some possible avenue of escape, since in his ardour for personal conflict with this reptile had evaporated. But search as he would, he could find nothing. The walls were full 30 feet high, and sloped inwards, like the sides of an inverted funnel. Wherever the exits from the pool might be, they were invisible. Also, notwithstanding his strength and skill, Otter did not dare swim into the furious eddy to look for them. One thing he noticed, indeed. Immediately above the entrance to the crocodile's den, and some 20 feet from the level of the water, 2 holes were pierced in the rock, 6 feet or so apart, each measuring about 12 inches square. But these holes were not to be reached, and even if reached, they were too small to pass, so Otter thought no more of them. Now the cold was beginning to nip him, and he felt that if he stayed where he was much longer, he would become paralyzed by it, for it was fed from the ice and snows above. Therefore it would seem that there was but one thing to do, to face the water dweller in his lair. To this then Otter made up his mind, albeit with loathing and a doubtful heart. End of chapter 31. Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How Otter Fought the Water Dweller. Keeping himself carefully under the overshadowing edge of the rock bank, and holding his double-bladed knife ready in one hand, Otter swam to the mouth of the snake's den. As he approached it, he perceived by the great upward force of the water that the real body of the stream entered the pool from below, the hole where the crocodile lived being a supplementary exit, which doubtless the river flowed in times of flood. Otter reached the mouth of the tunnel without any great difficulty, and watching his chance, he lifted himself on his hands and slipped through it quickly, for he did not desire to be seen by those who were gathered above. Nor indeed was he seen, for his red headdress and the goatskin cloak had been washed away or cast off in the pool, and in that light his black body made little show against the black rock beneath. Now he was inside the hole, and he found himself crouching upon a bed of sand, or rather disintegrated rock, brought down by the waters. The gloom of the place was great, but the light of the white dawn, which had turned to red, was gathering swiftly on the surface of the pool without as the mist melted, and thence was reflected into the tunnel. So it came about that very soon Otter, who had the gift, not uncommon among savages, of seeing in anything short of absolute darkness, was able to make out his surroundings with tolerable accuracy. The place in a corner of which he squatted was a cave of no great height or width, hollowed in the solid rock by the force of water, as smoothly as though it had been hewn by hand of man. In short, an enormous natural drain pipe, but constructed of stone instead of earthenware. In the bottom of this drain trickled a stream of water, nowhere more than 6 inches deep, and on either side of which, for 10 feet or more, lay a thick bed of debris ground small. How far the cave stretched, of course, he could not see, nor as yet could he discover the whereabouts of its hideous occupant, though traces of its presence were plentiful, for the sandy floor was marked with its huge footprints, and the air reeked with an abominable stink. "Where has this evil spirit gone to?" thought Otter. "He must be near, and yet I can see nothing of him. Perhaps he lives further up the cave," and he crept a pace or two forward and again peered into the gloom. Now he perceived what had hitherto escaped him, namely, that some 8 yards from the mouth of the tunnel a table-shaped fragment of stone rose from its floor to within 6 feet of the roof, having on the hither side a sloping plane that connected its summit with the stream bed beneath. Doubtless this fragment or boulder, being of some harder material than the surrounding rock, had resisted the wear of the rushing river, the top of it, as was shown by the high water marks on the sides of the cave, being above the level of the torrent, which, although it was now represented only by a rivulet, evidently at certain seasons of the year poured down with great force and volume. "Here is a bed on which a crocodile might sleep," reflected Otter, creeping a little bit forward and staring at the mass of rock, and more especially at a triangular-shaped object that was poised on top of the sloping plane, and on something which lay beneath it. "Now if that thing be another stone," thought Otter, "how comes it that it does not slip into the water as it should do, and what is that upon which it rests?" And he took a step to one side to prevent his body from intercepting any portion of the ray of light that momentarily shone clearer and pierced the darkness of the cave to a greater distance. Then he looked again and almost fell in his horror, for now he could see all. The thing that he had taken for a stone set upon the rock table was the head of the dweller in the waters, for there in it, as the light struck on them, 2 dreadful eyes gleamed with a dull and changing fire. Moreover, he discovered what was the object which lay under the throat of the reptile. It was the body of that priest whom Otter had taken with him in his leap from the statue, for he could see the dead face projecting on one side. "Perhaps if I wait a while he will begin to eat him," reflected the dwarf. "Remember the habits of crocodiles, and then I can attack him when he rests and sleeps afterwards." And acting on this idea, he stood still, watching the green fire as it throbbed and quivered, waxed and waned in the monster's eyes. How long he remained thus Otter never knew, but after a time he became conscious that these eyes had taken hold of him and were drawing him toward them, though whether the reptile saw him or not he could not tell. For a space he struggled against this unholy fascination, then, overcome by dread, he strove to fly back to the pool or anywhere out of reach of those devilish orbs. Alas, it was too late. No step could he move backwards, no, not to save his life. Now he must go on. It was as though the water-dweller had read his mind, and drew its foe towards itself to put the matter to the test. Otter took one step forward. Rather would he have sprung again off the head of the colossus, and the eyes glowed more dreadfully than ever, as though in triumph. Then in despair he sank to the ground, hiding his face in his hands and groaning in his heart. "This is a devil that I have come to fight, a devil with magic in his eyes," he thought. "And how can I, who am but a common knob-nosed dwarf, do battle against the king of evil spirits, clothed in the shape of a crocodile?" Even now, when he could not see them, he felt the eyes drawing him. Yet, as they were no longer visible, his courage and power of mind came back to him sufficiently to enable him to think again. "Otter," he said to himself, "if you stay thus, soon the magic will do its work. Your senses will leave you, and that devil will eat you up as a cobra devours a mere cat. Yes, he will swallow you, and his inside will be your grave, and that is no end for one who has been called a god. Man, let alone gods, should die fighting, whether it be with other men, with wild beasts, with snakes, or with devils. Think now, if your master, the Deliverer, saw you crouched thus like a toad before an adder, how he would laugh and say, 'Ho, I thought this man brave. Ho, he talked very loud about fighting the water-dweller, he who came of a line of warriors, but now I laugh at him, for I see that he is but a cross-bred cur and a coward.' Yes, yes, you can hear his words, Otter. Say now, will you bear their shame and sit here until you are snapped up and swallowed?" Thus the dwarf addressed himself, and it seemed to his bewildered brain that the words which he imagined were true, and that Leonard really stood by and mocked him. At last he sprang to his feet, and crying, "Never, Baas," so loudly that the cave rang with the echoes of his shout, he rushed straight at the foe, holding the two-bladed knife in his right hand. The crocodile that was waiting for him to fall insensible, as had ever been the custom of the living victims on whom it fixed its baneful glare, heard his cry and awoke from its seeming torpor. It lifted its head, fire seemed to flash from its dull eyes, its vast length began to stir, higher and higher it reared its head, then of a sudden it leaped from the slope of rock, as alligators when disturbed leaped from the river bank into the water, coming so heavily to the ground that the shock caused the cave to tremble, and stood before the dwarf with its tail arched upwards over its back. Again Otter shouted, half in rage and half in terror, and the sound seemed to make the brute more furious. It opened its huge mouth as though to seize him, and waddled a few paces forward, halting within 6 feet of him. Now the dwarf's chance had come, and he knew it, for with the opportunity all his courage and skill returned to him. It was he who sprang and not the crocodile. He sprang, he thrust his arm and the double knife far into the yawning mouth, and for a second held it there, one end pointing upward to the brain and one to the tongue beneath. He felt the jaws close, but their rows of yellow fangs never touched his arm, for there was that between them which held them some little space apart. Then he cast himself on one side and to the ground, leaving the weapon in the reptile's throat. For a few moments it shook its horrible head, while Otter watched gasping, for the reek of the brute's breath almost overpowered him. Twice it opened its great jaw and spat, and twice it strove to close them. Oh, what if it should rid itself of the knife, or drive it through the soft flesh of the throat? Then he was lost indeed, but this might not do. for the lower blade caught upon the jawbone, and at each effort it drove the sharp point of the upper knife deeper towards its brain. Moreover, so good was the steel, and so firm were the hide bindings of the handles, shrunken as they were with the wet, that nothing broke or gave. "Now he will trample me or dash me to pieces with his tail," said Otter. But as yet the snake had no such mind. Indeed, in its agony it seemed to have forgotten the presence of its foe. It writhed upon the floor of the cave, lashing the rock with its tail and gasping horribly the while. Then suddenly it started forward past him, and the tough hide rope about Otter's middle ran out like the line from the bow of a whaleboat when the harpoon has gone home in the quarry. Thrice the dwarf spun round violently, then he felt himself dragged in great jerks along the rocky floor, which, happily for him, was smooth. A fourth jerk, and once more he was in the waters of the pool, ay, and being carried to its remotest depths. "Now he is mad," thought Otter, "who ties himself to such a fish as this, for it will drown me ere it dies." Had Otter been any other man, doubtless this would have been so, but he was as nearly amphibious as a human being can be, and could dive and swim and hold his breath, yes, and see beneath the surface as well as the animal from which he took his name. Never did such gifts stand their owner in better stead than during the minutes of this strange duel. Twice the tortured reptile sank to the bottom of the pool, and its depth was great, dragging the dwarf after it, though, as it chanced, between dives it rose to the surface, giving him time to breathe. A third time it dived, and Otter must follow it, on this occasion to the mouth of one of these subterranean exits of water, into which the dwarf was sucked. Then the brute turned, and heading up the pool with the speed of a hooked salmon, and Otter, who had prayed that the line would break, now prayed that it might hold, for he knew that even he could never hope to swim against that undertow. It held, and once more they rose to the surface, where the reptile lay lashing the waters in its pain, blood pouring from its mouth and nostrils. Very glad was Otter to be able to breathe again, for during that last rush he had gone near to suffocation. He lifted his head, inhaling the air with great gulps, and saw that the banks of the pool were lined with spectators who shouted and surged in their mad excitement. After that he did not see much more for a while, since just then it seemed to occur to the crocodile for the first time that the man alongside of him was the cause of his suffering. At least it wallowed around, causing the waters to boil about its horny sides, and charged him. With its fangs it could not bite, therefore it struck at him with its tail. Twice Otter dived, avoiding the blows, but the third time he was not so successful, for the reptile followed him into the deep water and dealt him a fearful stroke before he could either sink or rise. He felt the rough scales cut into his flesh, and a sensation as though every bone in his body was breaking and his eyes were starting from his head. Faintly and more faintly he struggled, but in vain, for now life and sense were leaving him together, and everything grew black. But suddenly there came a change, and Otter knew vaguely that again he was being dragged through the water and over rock. Then darkness took him, and he remembered no more. When the dwarf awoke, it was to find himself lying on the floor of the cave, but not alone, for by his side, twisted into a last and hideous contortion, lay the snake god, dead. The upper part of the double knife had worked itself into its brain, and with a dying effort it sought the den where it had lived for centuries, dragging Otter with it, and there expired, how or when he knew not. But the dwarf had triumphed. Before him was stretched the ancient terror of the people of the mist, the symbol and indeed the object of their worship, slain by his skill and valour. Otter saw, and bruised and shaken as he was, his heart swelled with pride, for had he not done a deed single-handed, such as was not told of in the stories of this land? "Oh, that the Baas were here to see this sight," he said, as he crawled along the length of his dead enemy and seated himself upon its flat and loathsome snout. "Alas, he cannot," he added, "but I pray that my watching spirit may spare my life, that I may live to sing the song of the slaying of the devil of the people of the mist. Wow, that was a fight! When shall a man see another? And lo, save for many bruises and the cutting of the rope about my middle, I am not greatly hurt, for the water broke the weight of his tail when he smote me with it. After all, it is well that the line held, for it served to drag me from the pool as it had dragged me into it, otherwise I had surely drowned there. See, though, it is nearly done with," and grasping that end of the cord which hung from the jaws of the crocodile, he broke it with a jerk, for with the exception of half a strand, it was frayed through by the worn fangs. Thus, having rested himself a little and washed the worst of his hurts with water, Otter set himself to consider the position. First, however, he made an utterly ineffectual effort to extract the great knives. 10 men could not have moved them, for the upper blade was driven many inches deep into the bone and muscle of the reptile's massive head. But for this chance it would have soon shaken itself clear of them, but as it was, every contortion and gnashing of its jaws had only served to drive the steel deeper, up to the hilt indeed. Abandoning this attempt, the dwarf crept cautiously to the mouth of the cave and peered at the further banks of the pool, whence he could hear shouts and see men moving to and fro, apparently in a state of great excitement. "Now I am weary of that pool," he said to himself, "and if I am seen in it, the great people will surely shoot at me with arrows and kill me. What shall I do then? I cannot stay in this place of stink with the dead devil and the bones of those whom he has devoured until I die of hunger. Yet this water must come from somewhere, therefore it seems best that I should follow it a while, searching for the spot where it enters the cave. It will be dark walking, but the walls and the floor are smooth, so that I shall not hurt myself, and if I find nothing I can return again and strive to escape from the pool by night." Having thus decided upon the adventure, Otter began to carry it out with characteristic promptness, the more readily indeed because of his long immersion. The water had chilled him, and he felt a weariness creeping over him as a result of the terrible struggle and emotions that he had passed through. Coiling the hide rope about his middle, which was sadly cut by its chafing, he started with an uncertain gait, for he was still very weak. A few steps brought him to that rock on which he had discovered the head of the reptile, and he paused to examine it. Climbing the sloping stone, no easy task, for it was smooth as ice, he came to the table-like top. On its edge lay the body of that priest who had shared his fall from the head of the colossus. Then he inspected the surface of the rock, and for the first time understood how old the monster must have been which he had conquered in single combat. For there, where its body had lain from generation to generation, and perhaps from century to century, the hard material was worn away to the depth of 2 feet or more, while at the top of the sloping stone was a still deeper niche, where its head reposed as it lay keeping its sleepless watch on the waters of the pool. Around this depression, and strewn about the floor of the cave itself, were the remains of many victims, a considerable number of whom had not been devoured. In every case, however, the larger bones were broken, and from this circumstance Otter judged that, although it was the custom of this dreadful reptile to crush the life out of all who were thrown to it with a bite of its fangs, yet, like that of other animals, its appetite was limited, and it was only occasionally that it consumed what it had killed. The sight of these remains was so unpleasant and suggestive that even Otter, who certainly could not be called squeamish, hastened to descend the rock. As he passed round it his attention was attracted by the skeleton of a man who, from various indications, must have been alive within the last few weeks. The bones were clad in a priest's cloak, of which the dwarf, who was trembling with cold, hastened to possess himself. As he picked up the robe, he observed beneath it a bag of tanned oxhide that doubtless had once been carried by the owner of the cloak. Perhaps he kept food in this, thought Otter, though what he who came to visit the water dweller should want with food I cannot guess. At the least, it will be bad by now, so I will leave it and be gone. Only a vulture would stay for long in this house of the dead. Then he started forward. For a few yards more he had light to guide his steps, but very soon the darkness became complete. Still the cave was not difficult to travel, for everywhere the rock was smooth and the water shallow. All that he needed to do was to walk straight on, keeping touch of one side of the tunnel with one hand. Indeed, he had but two things to fear: that he should fall into some pit, and that he might suddenly encounter another crocodile. For doubtless, thought Otter, the devil was married. But Otter fell into no hole, and he saw no crocodile, since, as it chanced, the water dweller of the people of the mist was a bachelor. When the dwarf had travelled up a steep slope for rather more than half an hour, to his intense joy he saw light before him and hurried towards it. Presently he reached the further mouth of the cavern that was almost closed by blocks of ice, among which a little water trickled. Creeping through an aperture, he found himself upon the crest of the impassable precipice at the back of the city, and that before him a vast glacier of green ice stretched upwards, whereon the sun shone gloriously. End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of The People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Trapped. It will be remembered that some hours before Otter found himself in the light of day, after his conquest of the reptile god, Leonard found himself in a very different place, namely, in a secret passage bearing the senseless form of Juanna in his arms, and being guided by Soa, whither he knew not. On they went through the various tunnels, of the turnings of which Leonard tried to keep count in his mind, till at length Soa ushered him into a rock-hewn cell that evidently had been prepared for their reception, for on one side of it stood a bed covered with skin blankets, and on the other a table provided with the best food that the country could offer. At a sign from Soa he laid Juanna down upon the bed, whereon the woman instantly threw a blanket over her so as to hide her face from the eyes of the curious. Then of a sudden Leonard felt himself seized from behind. While his arms were held by two of the priests, a third, under Soa's direction, removed his revolver and hunting knife, which weapons were carried away. "You treacherous hag," said Leonard to Soa, "be careful lest I kill you." "To kill me, Deliverer, would be to kill yourself and another. These things are taken from you because it is not safe that you should have them. Such toys are not for angry children. Stay," she said to the fourth priest, "search his pockets." The man did as he was ordered, placing everything that Leonard had about him, such as his watch, Francisco's notebook and rosary, and the great ruby stone, in a little pile upon the table. Presently he came to the fragment of poison which was wrapped in a square of kid skin. Soa took it, and after examination said, "Why, Deliverer, you have been borrowing medicine that will bring you bad luck if you keep it," and going to a small aperture in the wall of the cell, she threw the tiny packet out of it, and after it a second packet, which Leonard recognized as having been taken from Juanna's hair. "There, now you cannot hurt yourself," she added in Portuguese. "Let me tell you something. So long as you remain quiet all will be well, but if you attempt violence or escape, then you shall be bound and placed by yourself. Also, you will bring about the death of the shepherdess yonder. Be warned then by me, white man, and turn gentle, for remember that my day has come at last, and you are in my power." "That is very clear, my estimable friend," answered Leonard, controlling his wrath as best he might. "But for your sake I hope that the hour will never come when you shall be in mine, for then I may remember more than you wish. I do not in the least understand what you are aiming at, nor do I much care so long as a certain person is protected." "Do not fear, Deliverer, she shall be protected. As you know well, I hate you, and yet I keep you alive because without you she might die. Therefore, for her sake, be careful. Attempt no violence towards me or my father if we visit you alone, for we shall do so in order that she may not be discovered, and the moment that you lift a hand against us it will be the beginning of her doom. And now I must leave you for a while, for something passeth in the temple which I desire to see. If she awakens before I return, be careful not to frighten her. Farewell." Then Soa went, taking the priest with her, and the massive timber door was closed upon them. After he had restored his various belongings to his pockets, the revolver and the knife which had been removed excepted, Leonard turned down the rug and looked at Juanna, who appeared to be plunged in a deep and happy sleep, for there was a smile upon her face. Next he examined the place where they were confined. It had two doors, that by which they had entered, and a second of equal solidity. The only other opening was the slit out of which Soa had dropped the poison. It was shaped like an inverted loophole, the narrow end facing inward. This aperture attracted Leonard's attention, both on account of its unusual form and because of the sounds that reached him through it. Of these, the first and most pervading was a noise of rushing water. Then after a while he distinguished a roar as of a multitude shouting, that was repeated again and again at intervals. Now he knew where they must be. They were hidden away in the rock of the temple, somewhere in the immediate neighbourhood of the raging pool that lay in front of the colossus, and these sounds which he heard were the clamour of the people who watched the fate of Otter and Francisco. This conviction was terrible enough, but had he known that, as it entered his mind, the body of his friend the priest was travelling on its last journey within 4 feet of his eyes, Leonard might have been even more prostrated than he was. For an hour or more the shouting continued, then followed a silence broken only by the everlasting murmur of the waters without. When Soa departed she had left a fragment of dip made of goat fat burning upon the floor, but very soon this expired, leaving them in darkness. Now, however, light began to flow into the dungeon through the slit in the rock, and it seemed to Leonard that the character of this light was clearer than that to which they had been accustomed in this gloomy land. After a while Leonard sat down upon a stool, which he placed close to Juanna's bed, just where the beam of light pierced the shadows, and groaned aloud in the bitterness of his heart. It was over. The pure-hearted martyr Francisco was dead, and with him Otter, his faithful friend and servant. Except Soa, who had become an active enemy, at least so far as he was concerned, of all who travelled to this hellish country, Juanna and he alone were left alive, and sooner or later fate must overtake them also. The greatest and last failure of his life was about to be consummated, and he will go down into a nameless grave, there to be lost, having for many years suffered and toiled to no purpose, pursuing a chimera. Juanna still slept heavily under the influence of the drug, and he was glad of it, for when she woke it must be to a worse misery than any that had gone before. Partly for something to do, and partly because the cravings of nature made themselves felt even through his sorrows, Leonard turned to the table and ate and drank of the viands there, though not without fear that they might be doctored. As the food took effect upon him, some share of hope and courage entered into his heart, for it is a true saying that a full stomach makes a brave man. After all, they too still breathed and were unharmed in body, nor was it absolutely certain that they would be called upon to give up the ghost at present. This was much. Moreover, he had lived long enough to win the love of the fearless and beautiful girl who slept beside him, and though perhaps under such circumstances love, however true and passionate, ceases to occupy a commanding place in a man's heart, even then he felt that this was more, and that happier days might dawn when it would be, if not everything, at least most of all. As he thought thus he saw colour creep into Juanna's pale face. Then she sighed, opened her eyes, and sat up. "Where am I?" she said, glancing round wildly. "This is not the bed on which I lay down. Oh!" she started, "is it over?" "Hush, dear, hush, I am with you," said Leonard, taking her hand. "So I see, but where are the others, and what is this dreadful place? Are we buried alive, Leonard? It looks like a tomb." "No, we are only prisoners. Come, eat and drink something, and then I will tell you the story." She rose to obey him, and for the first time her eyes fell upon the robe she wore. "Why, this is Francisco's. Where is Francisco?" "Eat and drink," he repeated. She did his bidding mechanically, watching his face the while with wondering and frightened eyes. "Now," she said, "tell me, I can bear this no longer. Where are Francisco and Otter?" "Alas, Juanna, they are dead," he answered solemnly. "Dead!" she wailed, wringing her hand. "Francisco dead! Why then are we still alive?" "Have courage and listen, Juanna. After you went to sleep in the palace, Soa came to us with a plan which we accepted." "What was the plan?" she asked hoarsely. Twice he strove to tell her, and twice he failed. The words would not come. "Go on. Why do you torment me?" "It was this, Juanna, that Francisco should be dressed in the robe of Aca and offered up with Otter in your place, while you were hidden away." "Has it been done?" she whispered. "I believe so," Leonard replied, bowing his head to his breast. "We are prisoners in a secret cell beneath the feet of the statue. There has been great noise and confusion without, and now for some time silence." Then Juanna sprang up and stood over him with flashing eyes. "How dare you do this?" she said. "Who gave you leave to do it? I thought that you were a man, now I see that you are a coward." "Juanna," said Leonard, "it is useless for you to talk like this. Whatever was done for your sake, not for that of anybody else." "Oh yes, you say so, but I believe that you made a plot with Soa to murder Francisco in order that you might save your own life. I have done with you. I will never speak to you again." "You can please yourself about that," answered Leonard, who by now was thoroughly enraged. "But I am going to speak to you. Look here, you have said words to me for which, were you a man, I would do my best to be avenged upon you. But as you are a woman, I can only answer them, and then wash my hands of you. As you must know, or will know, when you come to your right mind, I would gladly have taken Francisco's place, but it was impossible, for had I attempted to dress myself up in the robes of Aca, I should instantly have been discovered, and you would have paid the price of my folly. We all knew this, and after we had consulted, things were arranged as I have told you. I only consented to your being brought here on the condition that I was allowed to accompany you for your protection. Now I wish that I had left it alone and gone with Francisco. Then perhaps I should have found peace instead of bitter words and reproaches. However, do not be afraid, for I think it probable that I shall soon follow him. I know that you are very fond of this man, this hero, and also, by accident or design, that you had succeeded in making him a great deal too fond of you for his peace of mind. Therefore I make excuses for your conduct, which, with all such deductions, still remains perfectly intolerable." He paused and looked at her as she sat on the edge of the couch, biting her lip and glancing toward him now and again with a curious expression on her beautiful face, in which grief, pride, and anger all had their share. Yet at that moment Juanna was thinking not of Francisco and his sacrifice, but of the man before her whom she had never loved so well as now, when he spoke to her thus bitterly, paying her back in her own coin. "I cannot pretend to match you in scolding and violence," she said, "therefore I will give up argument. Perhaps, however, when you come to your right mind, you will remember that my life is my own, and that I gave nobody permission to save it at the cost of another person's." "What is done," answered Leonard moodily, for his anger had burnt out. "Another time I will not interfere without your express wish. By the way, my poor friend asked me to give you these," and he handed her the rosary and the notebook. "He has written something for you to read on the last sheet of the journal, and he bade me say that, should you live to escape, he hoped that you will wear these in memory of him," and he touched the beads, "and also that you would not forget him in your prayers." Juanna took the journal, and holding it to the light, opened it at hazard. The first thing she saw was her own name, for in truth it contained, among many other matters, a record of the priest's unhappy infatuation from the first moment of their meeting, and also of his pious efforts to overcome it. Turning the pages rapidly, she came to the last on which there was any writing. It read as follows: "Senora, of the circumstances under which I write these words you will learn in due course. The pages of this journal, should you deign to study them, will reveal to you my shameful weakness. But if I am a priest, I am also a man, who soon shall be neither, but, as I hope, an immortal spirit. And the man in me, following those desires of the spirit that find expression through the flesh, has sinned and loved you. Forgive me this crime, as I trust it will be forgiven elsewhere, though myself I cannot pardon it. Be happy with that noble gentleman who has won your heart, and who himself worships you as you deserve. May you be protected from all the dangers that now surround you, as I think you will, and may the blessings of heaven be with you and about you for many peaceful years, till at length you come to the peace that passeth understanding. And when from time to time you think of me, may you in your heart couple my name with certain holy words. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Senora, pardon me and farewell." Juanna read this touching and noble-hearted adieu with an ever-growing wonder, and when she had finished it, put down the book, crying aloud, "Oh, what have I done to deserve such devotion as this?" Then, with a strange and bewildering inconsequence, she flung herself into Leonard's arms, and burying her head upon his breast, she began to weep. When she was somewhat calmer, he also read the letter and closed the book, saying, "The world is poorer by a perfect gentleman. He was too good for any of us, Juanna." "I think so," she answered. Just then they heard a sound without the door. It opened, and Nam entered, accompanied by Soa. "Deliverer," said the aged priest, whose countenance and troubled eyes bore traces of many conflicting emotions, "and you, shepherdess, I come to speak with you. As you see, I am alone, except for this woman,
But should you attempt any violence toward her or me, that will be the signal for your deaths. With much toil and at no little risk to myself, I have spared the life of the shepherdess, causing the white man, your companion, to be offered up in her place." "Has that offering been accomplished?" broke in Leonard, who could not restrain his anxiety to learn what had happened. "I will be frank with you, Deliverer," answered the high priest, when Juanna had translated his question, "since the truth cannot hurt me, for now we know too much of one another's secrets to waste time in bandying lies. I know, for instance, that the shepherdess and the dwarf are no gods, but mortals like ourselves, and you know that I have dared to affront the true gods by changing the victim whom they had chosen. The sacrifice has been accomplished, but with so many signs and wonders that I am bewildered. The people of the mist are bewildered also, so that none know what to think. The white man, your companion, was hurled fainting into the waters when the dawn had broken upon the mountain and was seen to be grey, but the dwarf, your servant, did not wait to have that office done for him, for he sprang thither himself, ay, and took one with him." "Brave Otter!" cried Leonard. "I knew that you would die hard." "Hard did he die indeed, Deliverer," said Nam with a sigh, "so hard that even now many swear that he was a god and not a man." Scarcely had they all vanished into the pool when a wonder chanced such as has not been told of in our records. Deliverer, the white dawn turned to red, perchance, as I cried to calm the people, because the false gods had met their doom. "Then the true ones must be singularly blind," said Juanna, "seeing that I, whom you dare to call a false god, am still alive." This argument silenced Nam for a moment, but presently he answered. "Yes, shepherdess, you are still alive," he said, laying a curious emphasis on the "still." "And indeed," he added hastily, "if you are not foolish, you may long remain so, both of you, for I have no desire to shed your blood who only seek to end my last days in peace. But listen to the end of the tale. While the people wondered at the omen of the changed dawn, it was seen that the dwarf, your servant, was not dead there in the pool. Yes, this was seen, Deliverer. To and fro in the troubled waters rushed the great water dweller, and after him, keeping pace with him, went that dwarf who was named Otter. Ay, round and down to the lowest depths, though how it could be that a man might swim with a snake, none can say." "Oh, bravo, Otter!" said Leonard again, bethinking himself of an explanation of the mystery which he did not reveal to Nam. "Well, what was the end of it?" "That none know for certain, Deliverer," answered the priest perplexedly. "At last the water dweller, from whose mouth poured blood, was seen to sink with the dwarf. Then he rose again and entered the cave, his home. But whether the dwarf entered with him or no, I cannot say, for some swear one thing and some another, and in the foam and shadow it was hard to see. Moreover, none will venture there to learn the truth." "Well, dead or alive, he made a good fight for it," said Leonard. "And now, Nam, what is your business with us?" This question appeared to puzzle the priest a little, for, to speak the truth, he did not care to disclose the exact nature of his business, which was to separate Leonard from Juanna, without force if possible. "I came here, Deliverer," he answered, "to tell you what had happened." "Exactly," said Leonard, "to tell me that you have murdered my best friend, and one who was but lately your god. I thank you for your news, Nam, and now, if I might make bold to ask, what are your plans with reference to ourselves? I mean, until it suits you to send us after our companions." "Believe me, Deliverer, my plan is to save your lives. If the others have been sacrificed, it was no fault of mine, for there are forces behind me that I cannot control even when I guide them. The land is in confusion and full of strange rumours. I know not what may happen during the next few days." but till they are over you must lie hid. This is a poor place in which to dwell, but there is none other safer and secret. Still, here is another chamber which you can use. Perchance you have already seen it." And placing his hand upon what appeared to be a latch, he opened the second door which Leonard had noticed previously, revealing a cell of very similar construction to that in which they were, and of somewhat larger size. "See, Deliverer," he went on, "here is the place," and he stepped forward to enter the cell, then drew back as though in courtesy to allow Leonard to pass in before him. For once Leonard's caution forsook him, for at the moment he was thinking of other things. Almost mechanically he passed the threshold. Scarcely were his feet over it when he remembered the character of his host and the lodging, and turned quickly to come back. It was too late, for even as he turned, the heavy timber door closed in his face with a crash, and he was caged. End of chapter 33. War of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Nam's last argument. For a moment Juanna stood stupefied, for the maneuver had been so sudden that at first she could scarcely realize its results. "Now, Shepherdess," began Nam blandly, "we can talk in private, for I have words to say to you which it is not fitting that other ears should hear." "You fiend," she answered fiercely; then comprehending that violence or remonstrance would be useless, she added, "Speak on, I hear you." "Listen, Shepherdess, and for your own sake I implore you, do not give way to grief or rage. I swear to you that no harm shall come to yonder man if you will but do my bidding. Shepherdess, you are found out. I know, and the people know, that you are no goddess. It had been safer to sacrifice you today, but partly because of the pleading of my daughter, who loves you, and partly for other reasons, I have caused you to be saved alive. Now, Shepherdess, from this country there is no escape. As you have chosen to come hither, here you must remain for life, and in this cell you cannot live and die. Therefore, for my daughter's sake, I have cast about for a means to deliver you from your bonds and set you high in the land, ay, almost at its head." And he paused. "Perhaps you will come to the point," said Juanna, who was trembling with fear and anger. "It is this, Shepherdess," Nam answered, bowing. "Although you are dethroned as a goddess, you may still shine as a queen and rule over us as the wife of our king." "Indeed," replied Juanna, turning suddenly cold. "And how shall I, who am held to be dead, appear again as a woman wedded to your king? Surely the people would find that strange, Nam." "No, Shepherdess, for I have prepared a tale which shall explain the wonder, and already its rumour runs from mouth to mouth. It will be said that you were a goddess, and therefore immortal, but that for the sake of love you have put off your godhead and put on the flesh, that you might dwell for some years with him whom you desire." "Indeed," said Juanna again, "and what if I refuse to consent to this scheme, which, as I think, can have come only from a woman's brain?" And she pointed to Soa. "You are right, Shepherdess," answered Soa. "The plan is mine. I made it to save you, and also," she added coolly, "to be revenged upon that white thief who loves you, for he shall live to see you the wife of another man, a wild man." "And have you never thought, Soa, that I may have wishes of my own in this matter?" "Doubtless, yet the fairest women cannot always have what they may chance to wish. Know, Shepherdess, that this must be both for your own sake and for the sake of Nam, my father. Olfan loves you, and in these troubled times it is necessary that Nam and the priests should gain his support, which has been bought by now by the promise that you will be given to him in marriage on this very day. For you, shepherdess, although you might have wished to wed one of your own race, at least you will rule a queen, and that is better than to perish miserably." "I think otherwise, Soa," Juanna answered calmly, for she saw that neither passion nor pleading would help her, "and of the two I choose to die." And she put her hand to her hair, then started, for she found the poison gone. "You will choose to die, shepherdess," said Soa with a cold smile, "but this is not always so easy. I have taken your medicine from you while you slept, and here there are no other means to compass death." "I can starve, Soa," replied Juanna with dignity. "That takes some time, shepherdess, and today you will become the wife of Olfan. Still it is needful that you should yourself consent to marry him, for this chief is so foolish that he declares that he will not wed you till you have accepted him with your own mouth and in the presence of witnesses." "Then I fear that the wedding will not be celebrated," said Juanna with a bitter laugh, for she could not refrain from giving some outward expression to all the loathing which she felt for this wicked woman, who in her fierce love would save the life of her mistress by selling her to shame. "I think that it will, shepherdess," answered Soa, "for it seems that we have a way by which we can win you to speak those words which Olfan desires to hear." "There is no way, Soa." "What, none, shepherdess? Think now. He whom you name deliverer is a prisoner beyond that door. What if his life hangs upon your choice? What if he were shown to you about to die a fearful death from which you alone could save him by speaking a certain word?" Now for the first time Juanna fully understood the hideous nature of the plot whereby Soa proposed either to force her to become the wife of a savage, or thrust upon her the guilt of causing the death of the man whom she loved, and she sank back upon the couch, saying, "You would have done better to leave me yonder in the slave camp, Soa." Then, abandoning the tone of forced calm in which she had spoken hitherto, Soa broke out bitterly. "When you were in the slave camp, shepherdess, you loved me, who have loved you from a child, for then no white dog had come to sow mischief between us and to make you hate and distrust me. Then I would have died for you, ay, and this I would do now, but also I would be revenged upon the white dog, for I, who am husbandless and childless, had but this one thing, and he has taken it from me. You were to me as mother and lover and babe are to other women, my all, and now I am left desolate, and I will be revenged upon him before I die. But I still love you, shepherdess, and could any other plan have been found to help you, I could not have forced this marriage on you. No such plan can be found. Thus alone you can live and become great and happy, and thus alone can I continue to feast my eyes upon you, though it be from far." She ceased, trembling with the strength of the passion that shook her, to which indeed her words had given but feeble expression. "Go," said Juanna, "I would have time to think." Then Nam spoke again. "We go, shepherdess, in obedience to your wish, but before evening we shall return to hear your answer. Do not attempt to work mischief upon yourself, for know that you will be watched, though you cannot see the eyes that watch you. If you do but so much as lift a hand against your life, or even strive to cut off the light that flows through yonder hole, then at once you will be seized and bound, and my daughter will be set to guard you. Shepherdess, farewell." And they went, leaving Juanna alone, and a prey to such thoughts as can scarcely be written. For several hours she sat there upon the couch, allowing no hint of what she felt to appear upon her face, for she was too proud to suffer the eyes which she knew were spying on her, though whence she could not tell, to read her secret anguish. As she sat thus in her utter desolation, several things grew clear to Juanna, and the first of them was that Soa must be mad. The love and hate that seethed in her fierce heart had tainted her brain, making her more relentless than a leopard robbed of its young. From the beginning she had detested Leonard and had been jealous of him, and incautiously enough he had always shown his dislike and distrust of her. By slow degrees these feelings had hardened into insanity, and to gratify the vile promptings of her disordered mind she would hesitate at nothing. From Soa, therefore, she could hope for no relenting, nor had she better prospect with Nam, for it was evident that in his case political considerations operated as strongly as did those of a personal character with his daughter. He was so much involved, he had committed himself so deeply in this matter of the false gods, that rightly or wrongly he conceived Soa's plan to offer the only feasible chance of escape from the religious complications by which he was surrounded, that threatened to bring his life and power to a simultaneous end. It was out of the question, therefore, to expect help from the high priest, who was in the position of a man on a runaway horse with precipices on either side of him, unless indeed she could show him some safer path. Failing this, it would avail her nothing that he hated and feared Olfan, and only promoted this marriage in order to bribe the king into standing his friend during the expected political convulsions. Indeed, as she guessed rightly, Nam would much better like to know her safely over the borders of the Mist Land than to be called upon to greet her as its queen. This was obvious, seeing that, should she return to power, religious or temporal, it was scarcely to be hoped that she would forget the wrongs which she had suffered at his hands. The marriage was merely a temporal expedient designed to ward off immediate evil, but should it come about and the crisis be tided over, it was plain that the struggle between the false goddess and the perjured priest must be carried on until it ended in the death of one or both of them. However, all these things lay in the future, as Nam foretold it, a future which Juanna never meant to live to see. There remained Leonard and Olfan. The former, of course, was powerless, at least for the present, having suffered himself to be entrapped, though his lack of caution mattered little, for doubtless if guile had failed, force would have been employed. It was she who must save Leonard, for he could do nothing to save her. The more Juanna thought of the matter, the more she became convinced that her only hope lay in Olfan himself, who had sworn friendship to her, and who certainly was no traitor. She remembered that in their conversation of the day before he had admitted that she could be nothing to him while Leonard lived. Probably Nam had told her that the deliverer was dead, and then it was actuated by his passion, which she knew to be genuine enough, that he had entered into a bargain with the priest. These must be the terms of the compact, the game of the false gods being played. Olfan undertook to support Nam and the rest of his party to the best of his power, for the consideration to be received of her hand in marriage, stipulating, however, that she should give it of her own free will. This, of course, she would never do, therefore Olfan's proviso gave her a loophole of escape, though Juanna was well aware that it would not be wise to rely too implicitly on the generosity of the savage chief in matters upon which savages are apt to be neither generous nor delicate. On this she must fall back as a last resource, or rather as a last resource but one. Meanwhile she would fight Nam and Soa step by step. yielding only when she saw that further obstinacy on her part would involve Leonard's destruction. It was possible, indeed it was probable, that everything might fail her, and in that event she must not fail herself. In other words, although the poison had been taken from her, she must find a means of death. Having thought these problems out so far as it was in her power to do, Juanna rose and began to walk up and down the cell, noting its construction and peculiarities. Doubtless Leonard was behind yonder door, but it was so thick that she could hear nothing of his movements. For the rest, it seemed clear that escape was impossible. Excepting the door, the shaft in the rock was the only other opening that she was able to see, but through this no child could pass, and if he might, it would be to fall into the pool of raging water. Had Otter lived through that fight with the snake god, she wondered? There was small chance of it, but at least he had made an end worthy of his reputation, and she felt proud of him. And the other, Francisco, of him also she was proud indeed, but for herself she was ashamed, for she knew that she had been to blame, though not designedly. Who would have guessed that this frail timid man could prove himself such a hero, or who could estimate the power of the unsought and unhappy love which enabled him to conquer the fear of death? She had been wrong to be angry with Leonard, for she knew well that, if it could have been so, he would gladly have given his own life for hers. Alas, it seemed that she was always wrong, for her temper was quick, and the tongue is an unruly member. They had both of them been ready to die for her, and one of them had done so. Well, now it was probable that the tables would be turned before many hours were over, and that she would be called upon to offer herself to save her lover. If this came about, she would not forget the example of Francisco, but would rather try to equal it in the heroism of her end. The day passed slowly, and at length the gloom gathering in the little cell told her that night was near. Before it fell, however, Soa and Nam entered, bearing candles, which they fixed upon brackets in the walls. "We come, Shepherdess, to hear your answer," said Nam. "Will you consent to take Olfan for a husband, or will you not?" "I will not consent." "Think again, Shepherdess." "I have thought. You have my answer." At the words Nam seized her arm, saying, "Come hither, Shepherdess, I would show you something," and he led her to that door in passing which Leonard had been entrapped. And at the same time Soa extinguished one of the candles, taking the other in her hand as she left the cell, bolting the door behind her, so that Nam and Juanna stood in darkness. "Shepherdess," said Nam sternly, "you are about to see him whom you named the Deliverer. Now remember this: if you cry out or speak above a whisper, he dies." Juanna made no answer, although she felt her heart grow faint within her. 5 minutes or more passed, and of a sudden a panel slid back in the upper part of the door which connected the two cells, so that Juanna could see through it, although those who stood on the further side could not see her, for they were in light and she was in darkness. And this is what she saw. Ranged against the wall of the second prison and opposite to her were 3 priests holding candles in their hands, whereof the light shone upon their sullen, cruel faces and the snake's head tattooed on their naked breasts. In front of these men stood 2 other priests, and between them was Leonard, bound and gagged. On the hither side of the cell, and not more than 2 feet from the open panel, stood Soa, on whom the eyes of the executioners were fixed, as though awaiting a command. Between Soa and these men yawned an open hole in the rock floor. When Juanna had gazed upon this scene for some 20 seconds, The sliding panel was closed, apparently by Soa, and Nam spoke. "You have seen, Shepherdess," he said, "that the Deliverer is bound, and you have seen also that before him is a hole in the floor of the prison. He who falls down that hole, Shepherdess, finds himself in the den of the snake beneath, from the visiting of whom no man has ever returned alive, for it is through it that we feed the water dweller at certain seasons of the year, and when there is no sacrifice. Now, Shepherdess, you must choose between two things, either to wed Olfan of your own free will this night, or see the Deliverer thrown to the snake before your eyes, and afterwards to wed Olfan whether you will it or not. What do you say, Shepherdess?" Juanna took counsel with herself, and came to the conclusion that she would resist a little longer, for she thought that this scene might have been planned merely to try her fortitude. "I refuse to marry Olfan," she answered. Then Nam opened the panel and whispered a word into the ear of Soa, who uttered a command. Instantly the two executioner priests flung Leonard onto his back upon the ground, an easy task, seeing that his legs were fastened with ropes, and dragged him forward until his head hung over the oubliette-like hole. Then they paused as though waiting for some further order. Nam drew Juanna some few paces away from the door. "What is your word now, Shepherdess?" he said. "Is the man to die or be saved? Speak swiftly." Juanna glanced through the opening and saw that now Leonard's head and shoulders had vanished down the oubliette, while one of the priests held him by the ankles, watching Soa for the sign to let him fall. "Loose him," said Juanna faintly. "I will marry Olfan." Stepping forward, Nam whispered to Soa, who issued another order. Thereupon the priests drew Leonard from his perilous position, and unwillingly enough rolled him to the side of the cell, for they would have preferred to be rid of him. At that moment also the shutter was closed. "I said loose him," repeated Juanna, "now that the man lies unable to move like a fallen tree on the ground." "No, Shepherdess," replied Nam. "Perchance you may yet change your mind, and then it would be troublesome to bind him afresh, for he is very strong and violent. Listen, Shepherdess, when Olfan comes presently to ask your hand, you must say nothing of that man yonder, for he deems him to be dead, and the moment you speak of him he will be dead. Do you understand?" "I understand," answered Juanna, "but at least the gag might be taken from his mouth." "Fear not, Shepherdess, it shall be done when you have spoken with Olfan. And now, at what hour will it be your pleasure to see him?" "When you will. The sooner it is finished the better." "Good. My daughter," he added to Soa, who had just then entered the cell, "be pleased to make fire, and then summon the King Olfan, who waits without." Soa departed upon her errand, and overcome with terror which she would not show, Juanna sank upon the couch, hiding her face in her hands. For a while there was silence, then the door opened again, and heralded by Soa, Olfan the king stood before her. "Be careful, Shepherdess," whispered Nam as they entered. "One word and the Deliverer dies." End of chapter 34.
Of the People of the Mist by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Be noble or be base. For a while there was silence. Then Juanna looked up, searching Olfan's face with her eyes. Nothing was to be read there, for it was impossible to pierce the mask of solemn calm beneath which, in common with all his race, the king was accustomed to hide his thoughts. He leaned on the shaft of his broad spear, his head bowed slightly as though in humility, his dark eyes fixed upon her face, immovable, impassive, a picture of savage dignity. Indeed, Juanna was fain to confess to herself that she had never seen a grander specimen of the natural man than that presented by the chief of the People of the Mist, as he stood before her in her rock prison. The light of the candles fell full upon him, revealing his great girth and stature, besides which those of the finest men of her own race would have seemed insignificant. It shone upon the ivory torques, emblems of royalty, which were about his neck, wrist, and ankles, upon the glossy garments of black goatskin that hung from his shoulders and middle, and the raven tresses of his hair bound back from his forehead by a narrow band of white linen, which showed in striking contrast against the clear olive colouring of his face and breast. "Speak, Olfan," said Juanna at length. "It was told to me, Queen," he answered in a low, full voice, "that you had words to say to me. Nevertheless, now as always, I obey you. Queen, I learn that your husband, he whom you loved, is dead, and believe me, I sorrow for you. In this shameful deed I had no hand, that together with the end of the other white man and the dwarf, must be set down to the account of the priest, who swears that he was driven to it by the clamour of the people. Queen, they have all gone across the mountains and through the sky beyond, and you, like some weary dove, far travelled from a southern clime, are left a prey among the eagles of the People of the Mist. But a few hours since I thought you dead also, for with all the thousands in the temple I believed that it was your fair body which Nam hurled at dawn from the brow of the statue, and I tell you that when I saw it, I, who am a warrior, wept and cursed myself, because although I was a king, I had no power to save you. Afterwards this man, the high priest, came to me, telling me the truth and a plan that he had made for his own ends, whereby you might be saved alive and lifted up among the people, and he also might be saved, and my rule be made sure in the land." And he ceased. "What is the plan, Olfan?" asked Juanna after a pause. "Queen, it is that you should wed me and appear before the people no longer as a goddess, but as a woman who has put on the flesh for her love's sake. I know well that I am all unworthy of such honour, moreover, that your heart must be sore with the loss of one who was dear to you, and little set upon the finding of another husband. Also I remember certain words that passed between us, as a promise which I made. All these things I told to Nam, and he answered me, saying that the matter was urgent, that here you could not be hid away for long, and that if I did not take you to wife, then you must die. Therefore, because my love towards you is great, I said to him, 'Go now and ask her if she will smile upon me, if I come before her with such words.' Nam went, but before he went he made certain agreements with me on matters of policy, under which I must pay a heavy price for you, lady, and forego revenge and forget many an ancient hate, all of which things I have promised to do, should you smile upon me, so great is my love towards you." The hours went by, and Nam came back to me, saying that, having weighed the matter in your mind, your answer was favourable. To this I replied that I did not trust him, and would take it from your lips alone. And now, Queen, I am here to listen to your word, and to offer myself to you, to serve you all my life as your husband and your slave. I have little to give you who have been bred up in sunnier lands, and among a more gentle people. I, who am but the wild chief of men, whose hearts are rugged as our mountains, and gloomy as a winter's day, that is heavy with snow to come. Only myself, the service of my soldier spears, and the first place among the children of the mist. Now let me hear your answer, and be what it may, I will accept it without a murmur, for least of all things do I desire to force myself upon you in marriage. Still, I pray you, speak to me plainly once and for all, for if I must lose you, I would know the worst, nor I can bear, when you have smiled upon me, to see you turn away. Nay, I would sooner die." And once more he bowed his head, leaned upon his spear, and was silent. Juanna considered the position rapidly. It was hopeless and cruel. Nam and Soa were on either side of her, the latter standing near the door with the sliding panel beyond which Leonard lay bound, and she knew well that did she speak a single word of the truth to Olfan, it would be the signal for her lover's death. It was possible that the king might be able to protect her own person from violence, but if Leonard died, it mattered little what became of her. There was but one thing that she could do: declare herself willing to become the wife of Olfan. Yet it seemed shameless thus to treat this honourable man, the only friend that they had found among the people of the mist. But of truth, such necessity as hers cannot wait while those in their toils weigh scruples or the law of honour. "Olfan," she said, "I have heard you, and this is my answer. I will take you as my husband. You know my story. You know that he who was my lord is but this day dead." Here Soa smiled approvingly at the lie, "and that I loved him. Therefore, of your gentleness, you will accord me some few weeks before I pass from him to you, in which I may mourn my widowhood. I will say no more, but surely you can guess the sorrow of my heart and all that I have left unsaid." "It shall be as you wish, Queen," replied Olfan, taking her hand and kissing it, while his sombre face grew radiant with happiness. "You shall pass into my keeping at that time which best pleases you, yet I fear that in one matter you must be troubled now, this very hour." "What may that be, Olfan?" asked Juanna anxiously. "Only this, Queen, that the rite of marriage, as we practise it, must be celebrated between us. It is necessary for many reasons, which will be made clear to you tomorrow. Moreover, such was my bargain with Nam, sealed by an oath sworn upon the blood of Aca, an oath that I do not dare to break." "Oh, no, no," said Juanna in acute distress. "Think, Olfan, how can I, whose husband is not 6 hours dead, vow myself to another man upon the altar of his grave? Give me some few days, I pray you." "Most willingly would I do this, lady, but I may not. It is against my oath. Also, what can it matter? You shall remain alone for as long as it shall please you." Then Nam spoke for the first time, saying: "Shepherdess, waste no breath in words, for learn that though this garment of modesty is becoming to one newly widowed, yet you must put it from you. More depends upon this ceremony than you know of. The lives of many hang upon it, our own perchance among them, and especially the life of one whom it does not become me to speak." And as though by accident, Nam let his eyes rest upon the door of the adjoining cell. Of his auditors often thought that he was alluding to his own life, but Juanna and his daughter knew well that he spoke of that of Leonard, which would be sacrificed did the former persist in her objections to the instant celebration of the marriage. "You hear his words, Queen," said Olfan, "and there is weight in them. The times are very dangerous, and if our plot is to be carried through before midnight, I must make an oath to the captains and the council of the elders that you have come back from death to be my wife." "Maybe," answered Juanna, catching at a straw in her despair, "but must I? who shall be set over this people as queen, be married thus in secret? Or at the least I will have witnesses. Let some of the captains whom you trust, Olfan, be brought here to see us wed, otherwise the time may come when I shall be held to be no true wife, and there are none to establish my honour by their words." "There is little to fear of such a thing, Queen," answered Olfan with a faint smile. "Yet your demands are just. I will bring 3 of my captains here, men who will not betray us, and they shall be witness to this rite," and he turned as though he would go to seek them. "Do not leave me," said Juanna, catching him by the wrist. "I trust you, but these 2 I do not trust. I fear to be left alone." "There is no need for witnesses," exclaimed Nam in a threatening voice. "The Shepherdess has asked for witnesses, and she shall have them," answered Olfan fiercely. "Old man, you have played with me long enough. Hitherto I have been your servant, now I will be your master. Some hours ago your life was forfeit to me, for the white dawn had turned to red, and I meant to take it, but you bribed me with this bait," and he pointed to Juanna. "Nay, do not lay your hand upon your knife. You forget I have my spear. Your priests are without, I know it, but so are my captains, and I have told them where I am. If I vanish, as many vanish here, my life will be required at your hands, for Nam, your power is broken. Now obey me. Bid that woman summon him who guards without. No, you do not stir," and he lifted the spear till its keen blue point quivered over the high priest's naked breast. "Bid her to go to the door and summon the guard. I said to the door, but not beyond it, or beware." Nam was cowed. His tool had become his master. "Obey," said the Soa. "Obey, but no more," echoed Olfan. Snarling like a wolf, the woman slipped past them to the door, and opening it a little way, she whistled through the crack. "Hide yourself, lady," said Olfan. Juanna retreated into the shadow behind the candle, and at that moment a voice spoke through the door, saying, "I am here, father." "Now speak," said Olfan, advancing the spear an inch nearer Nam's heart. "My son," said the priest, "go to the entrance by which the king entered, where you will find 3 captains, generals of the king. Lead them hither." "And see that you speak to no one on the way," whispered Olfan in Nam's ear. "And see that you speak to no one on the way," repeated Nam. "I hear you, father," replied the priest, and went. Some 10 minutes passed, and the door opened again. "The captains are here," whispered a voice. "Let them enter," said Nam. The order was obeyed, and 3 great men, armed with spears, stalked into the narrow chamber. One of them was the brother to the king, and the 2 others were his chosen friends. Then the door closed. "My brethren," said Olfan, "I have sent for you to acquaint you with a mystery, and to ask you to witness a rite. The goddess Aca, who this day was hurled into the pool of the Snake, has returned to earth as a woman, and is about to become my wife." Here the captains started. "Nay, brethren, ask no questions. These things are so. It is enough. Now, priest, play your part." After that, for a while, all seemed a dream to Juanna, a dream of which she was never able to recover any exact memory. She could recollect standing side by side with Olfan, while Nam muttered prayers and invocations over them, administering to them terrible oaths which they took, calling upon the names of Aca and Jâl, and swearing by the symbol of the snake. Beyond that everything went blank. Indeed, her mind flew back to another marriage ceremony, where she stood beside Leonard in the slave camp, and the priest Francisco prayed over them and blessed them. It was that scene which she saw, and not the one enacting before her eyes, and with its visions were mixed up strange impersonal reflections on the irony of fate, which had brought it about that she should figure as the chief actor in two such dramas, the first of which Leonard had gone through to save her, and the second of which she must go through to save him. At last it was done, and once more Olfan was bowing before her and kissing her hand. "Greetings, shepherdess. Hail, Queen of the People of the Mist," he said, and the captains repeated his words. Juanna awoke from her stupor. What was to be done now, she wondered? What could be done? Everything seemed lost. Then of a sudden an inspiration took her. "It is true that I am queen, is it not, Olfan?" "It is true, lady. And as Queen of the People of the Mist I have power, have I not, Olfan?" "Even to life and death," he answered gravely, "though if you kill, you must answer to the council of elders and to me. All in this land are your servants, lady, and none dare to disobey you, except on matters of religion." "Good," said Juanna. Then addressing the captains in a tone of command, she added, "Seize the priest who is named Nam, and the woman with him." Olfan looked astonished, and the captains hesitated. As for Nam, he did not hesitate, but made a bound towards the door. "Stay a while, Nam," said the king, making a barrier before him with his spear. "Doubtless the queen has reasons, and you would wish to hear them. Hold them, my captains, since the queen commands it." The three men sprang upon them. Once Nam tried to draw his knife, but failing in his attempt, he submitted without further struggle. With Soa it was different. She bit and tore like a wild cat, and Juanna saw that she was striving to reach the panel and to speak through it. "On your lives, do not suffer her to come to that door," she said. "Presently you shall know why." Then the brother of the king dragged Soa to the couch, and throwing her down upon it, stood over her, his spear point at her throat. "Now, Queen," said Olfan, "your will is done, and perhaps it may please you to explain." "Listen, King, and listen, you captains," she answered. "These liars told you that the Deliverer was dead. Was it not so? He is not dead. He lies bound in yonder cell. But had I spoken a word to you, then he would have died. Olfan, do you know how my consent was won to be your wife? A shutter within that door was opened, and he, my husband, was shown to me, gagged and bound, and being held over the mouth of a hideous pit in the floor of his prison, that leads I know not whither. 'Consent or he dies,' they said, and for my love's sake I consented. This was the plot, Olfan, to marry me to you, partly because the woman yonder, who was my nurse, did not desire my death, and partly that Nam might use me to save himself from the anger of the people. But do not think that you would have kept me long, Olfan, for this was in the plot also, that when you had served their purpose you should die by secret means, as one who knew too much." "It is a lie," said Nam. "Silence," answered Juanna. "Let that door be opened, and you shall see if I have lied." "Wait a while, Queen," said Olfan, who appeared utterly overcome. "If I understand you right, your husband lives, and therefore you say that the words which we have spoken and the oaths that we have sworn mean nothing, for you are not my wife." "That is so, Olfan." "Then now I am minded to turn wicked and let him die," said the king slowly. "For know this, lady, I cannot give you up." Juanna grew pale as death, understanding that this man's passion, now that once he had given them way, had passed beyond his control. "I cannot give you up," he repeated. "Have I not dealt well with you? Did I not say to you, 'Consent or refuse, as it shall please you'? But having once consented, you must not go back upon your words. What have I to do with the reasons that prompted them? My heart heard them and believed them. Queen, you are wed to me. Those oaths that you have sworn may not be broken. It is too late. Now you are mine, nor can I suffer you to pass from me back to another man, even though he was your husband before me." "But the Deliverer, must I then become my husband's murderer?" "Nay, I will protect him, and, if it may be, find means to send him from the land." Juanna stood silent and despairing, and at this moment Soa, lying on the couch, broke into a shrill and mocking laugh that stung her like a whip and roused her from her lethargy. "King," she said, "I am at your mercy, not through any wanton folly of my own, but because fate has made a sport of me. King, you have been hardly used, and, as you say, hitherto you have dealt well with me. Now I pray you let the end be as the beginning was, so that I may always think of you as the noblest among men, except one who died this day to save me. King, you say you love me. Tell me then, if my life hung upon a word of yours, would that word remain unspoken? Such was my case. I spoke the word, and for one short hour I betrayed you. Will you, whose heart is great, bind me by such an oath as this, an oath wrung from me to save my darling from the power of those dogs? If this is so, then I have erred strangely in my reading of your mind, for till now I have held you to be a man who would perish ere he fell so low as to force a helpless woman to be his wife, one whose crime is that she deceived him to save her husband." She paused, and clasping her hands as though in prayer, looked up into his troubled face with beseeching eyes. Then, as he did not speak, she went on: "King, I have one more word to say. You are the strongest, and you can take me, but you cannot hold me, for that hour would be my last, and you but the richer by your broken honour and a dead bride." Olfan was about to answer when Soa, fearing lest Juanna's pleading should prevail against his passion, broke in saying: "Be not fooled, King, by a woman's pretty speeches, or by her idle threats that she will kill herself. She will not kill herself. I know her well. She loves her life too much, and soon, when you are wed, she will love you also, for it is the nature of us women to worship those who master us. Moreover, that man, the Deliverer, is not her husband except in name. For months I have lived with them, and I know it. Take her, King, take her now, this hour, or live to mourn her loss and your folly all your life's days." "I will not answer that slave's falsehood," said Juanna, drawing herself up and speaking proudly, "and it were more worthy of you not to listen to them, King. I have spoken, now do your will. Be great or little, be noble or be base, as your nature teaches you." And suddenly she sank to the ground, and shaking her long hair about her face and arms, she burst into bitter weeping. Twice the king glanced at her, then he turned his head as though he dare look no more, and spoke, keeping his eyes fixed upon the wall. "Rise, Queen," he said hoarsely, "and cease your tears, since you are safe from me. Now as always I live to do your will, but I pray you hide your face from me as much as may be, for, lady, my heart is broken with love for you, and I cannot bear to look on that which I have lost." Still sobbing, but filled with admiration and wonder that a savage could be thus generous, Juanna rose and began to murmur thanks, while the captains stared, and Soa mocked and cursed them both. "Thank me not," he said gently. "It seems that you, who can read all hearts, have read mine aright, or perchance you fashioned it as you would have it be. Now, having done with love, let us to war. Woman, what is the secret of that door?" "Find it for yourself," snarled Soa. "It is easy to open when once you know the spring, like a woman's heart, Olfan. Or if you cannot find it, then it can be forced, like a woman's love, Olfan. Surely you who are so skilled in the winning of a bride need not seek my counsel as to the opening of a door, for when I gave it But now upon the first of these matters you would not hearken, Olfan, but were melted by the sight of tears that you should have kissed away." Juanna heard, and from that moment made up her mind that whatever happened she had done with Soa. Nor was this wonderful, for few women could have pardoned what she had suffered at her hands. "Drive the spear into her till she speaks, comrade," said Olfan. Then at the touch of steel Soa gave up mocking and told the secret of the door. End of chapter 35.